afternoon. I'm Congresswoman Terry Sewell, and I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District, the home of the cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, Tuscaloosa, and my hometown of Selma, Alabama. It is an honor for me to be here today, and I take it as a personal point of privilege to be in my hometown at the foot of the bridge to announce that earlier today we introduced H.R. 4, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, into the 117th Congress. As many of you know, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was only made possible because of the personal sacrifices of amazing foot soldiers, many known and unknown, right here on this bridge in my hometown 56 years ago on Bloody Sunday. As John Lewis would say, he shed a little blood on this bridge for the equal right to vote for all Americans. It is an honor for me to not only represent Alabama's 7th District, but to especially represent my hometown, Selma, Alabama, and the legacy of these foot soldiers. It is because of the Shelby versus Holder decision, which gutted the full protections of the Voting Rights Act, that we stand proudly to introduce H.R. 4. As many of you know, in 2013, the Shelby versus Holder decision found that Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was unconstitutional. They said that Section 4, which provided the formula by which states will determine which states would have to pre-clear their voting laws, would be determined, they found that to be unconstitutional. They said that Congress was punishing states like Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, the states of the Confederacy, for what happened in the 1960s, in the 1950s, and the 1940s. And the Supreme Court in the Shelby versus Holder decision really gave an introduction to Congress to come up with a modern-day formula. They said that only Congress could come up with a modern-day formula to put the enforceability of Section 5 pre-clearance back into the law. And that's exactly what we do in H.R. 4. H.R. 4 will have a look-back year of 25 years, and if a state or jurisdiction has had 10 or more violations, including a statewide violation, or 15 violations with no statewide violation, then that state would be considered a covered jurisdiction. So we're not looking back to the 1960s and 1950s. We're looking at 1996 going forward, 25 years. And as you can tell by the big lie that has been spread for the election of 2020, many states have had a concerted effort to have more restrictive voting laws put into place. In fact, 18 states have enacted over 30 laws just this year to be more restrictive. What we need is federal oversight. Federal oversight should only be reserved for the most egregious actors in this case. And so we believe that by setting up a regime that includes a geographical location test as well as a known practice test, that we will provide the kind of evidence and the kind of enforcement, federal enforcement, needed to make sure that we honor the legacy of these foot soldiers. According to the Brenner Center, just this year, state lawmakers have introduced more than 400 bills in 49 states, and in 18 states, 30 of these anti-voter bills have already been signed into law. Driven by the big lie of a stolen election, state legislatures across this nation are ramping up to restrict the right to vote. On July 1st, 2021, in the Bonovich versus DNC Arizona case, the Supreme Court dealt another blow to the Voting Rights Act, upholding racially discriminatory voting restrictions in Arizona despite evidence that these laws were intentionally designed to target Latino and other minority voters. Therefore, H.R. 4 will also go to clarify congressional legislative intent when it comes to Section 2, which is the lawsuits that can be filed in order to enforce voting rights. In its decision to uphold Arizona's discriminatory anti-voter laws, the Supreme Court weakened one of the few remaining protections available to those voters facing discriminatory practices. The reason why Section 4 is so important, it works in complement with Section 2. Section 4 is prophylactic. It allows certain states that have had a recent history of voter discrimination, to pre-clear its voter laws, therefore acting to prevent elections from occurring with these discriminatory laws. Section 2 is an action that can be brought by a lawsuit after the elections have occurred. So after the ringing of the bell. That's why we need both. And in H.R. 4, we will be clarifying Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and in Section 4, we will be adding a new Section 4, which will be a pre-clearance formula. Now, I guess you would say that I'm here on the foot of the bridge to get into some good trouble, what John Lewis would call necessary trouble. In order to honor the legacy of Amelia Boynton, F.D. Reese, John Lewis, and so many known and unknown foot soldiers, we in Congress must pass H.R. 4. I look forward to this bill being passed out of the House of Representatives as early as next week, and then going over to the Senate, where we know that the majority of the senators would vote for H.R. 4. We have to make sure that the filibuster does not stop us from doing what we know is right. As John Lewis would say, when you see something that is not right, that is not just, that is unfair, we have an obligation to do something about it. So I'm honored today to be at the foot of the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right here in Selma, Alabama, to get into some good trouble, and to ask all of you to get into some good trouble by contacting your senators and your representatives to make sure that they too vote for the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. In closing, I would like to also invoke John Lewis's words. John said that ours is not a struggle for one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is a struggle not just for a presidential appointment or doing a presidential term or judicial appointment. Ours is a struggle of a lifetime, and each and every one of us must play our part. I'm asking my constituents to play your part. Let us stand up for the rights of every American to have an equal right and equal access to the ballot box. It is not only right, it is just, and it is fair, and it is the American democratic way. Thank you, and I open up for questions.
Congresswoman, you mentioned the filibuster. That seems to be the biggest roadblock here, and I realize that's the other side of the Capitol, but how do you get past that? Republicans seem dead set against this bill.
Well, as you can tell, Joe Manchin has already said that he's in favor of the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act, H.R. 4. So we feel very confident that we will have the votes on the Democratic side in order to pass it. You're absolutely right that the filibuster stands in our way. And frankly, if there's any reason to revise or reform the filibuster, it is to protect our democracy. And so I'm standing here at the foot of the bridge urging my Republican and Democratic colleagues to work together. You know, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed with bipartisan support. It was reauthorized under Republican presidents, President Ford, President Reagan, and yes, President George W. Bush. It has enjoyed bipartisan support, and I am urging once again that we stand up for the rights of all Americans by passing this on a bipartisan basis. I think that if there's ever a reason for us to reform or revise the filibuster, it is for Democratic bills such as this one, in order to ensure that every American has equal right and equal access to the ballot box.
You said that it was going to clarify. How will this bill clarify what's already written?
So for Section 2, which was weakened by the Bonovich case, which came down in July of 2021, just recently, where the Supreme Court inserted its own factors as to what was required in order to have a vote denial versus a vote dilution case brought before the Supreme Court. We have legislative history on the Senate side and the House side dating back to 1982 saying what factors we in Congress believe are the factors that should be considered in those types of Section 2 cases. So we look forward to clarifying Section 2 and imposing a new Section 4 in H.R. 4. That's what the bill will do. It will fully restore the protections of the Voting Rights Act and enforceability, and once again provide federal oversight, which is only needed when states go amok. And what we see right now is a concerted effort by many state legislatures across this country to impose more restrictive laws. Now more than ever, we need the prophylactic measure of preclearance for the most egregious state actors, and we need known practices, things like changes in polling stations without notifications, changes in bilingual voting materials that cause a dilution in the vote, going to at-large elections when we should be at district-by-district elections. There are certain known practices that have shown themselves to be anti-democratic towards voters, and those are the things that we tend to stop. And you know what H.R. 4 does, unlike H.R. 1, is it's narrowly tailored to restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that the foot soldiers shed a little blood on this bridge for Bloody Sunday in order for the rights of all of us to have an equal access to the ballot box. So, you know, I think that it complements H.R. 1. H.R. 1 is a more broader bill that will deal with voting practices more broadly and access to the ballot box by imposing Empowerment Act, by making folks disclose dark money in elections, by having stronger ethics, and by having a stronger redistricting commission nationwide. So I think that both H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 working together will both restore our democracy, and in doing so is the reason why I think that the senators should allow the filibuster to be reformed for these kind of democratic policies.
What will this mean specifically for Alabamians?
You know, for Alabamians, it will mean that we have a stronger federal protection and federal oversight. It's not just for Alabamians, it's for all Americans. We saw in the 1960s that when states were not doing right by its citizens, it was the federal court system that stepped in and provided that protection. Federal oversight is still needed as we see states' legislatures run amok since the 2020 election, which ostensibly was the safest election in our history. By all accounts, experts, folks on the ground, even Republican election officials have said that. But yet we now see a response from so many state legislatures across this country adding more restrictive voter laws. Why? If not to control who should win or lose in these elections. I believe it's the citizens that should determine their vote, their elected officials, and not the other way around. The elected officials should not be choosing for citizens who should get elected. And with that, I think the H.R. 4 being limited to enforceability and providing federal oversight recent efforts of discrimination is the right way to go. And so I look forward to, as a proud Selmian, picking up the banter that F.D. Reese and Amelia Boynton really carried back in 1965 and doing my part as a federal legislator to ensure that we have federal oversight once again for the most egregious actors in this space.
Congresswoman, you know, right now the census data has come in. We're about to redraw district lines across the nation. It's a battleground, obviously, between Democrats and Republicans. How does this bill kind of play in with that and with the elections just less than a year away?
You know, because H.R. 4 would restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act and ensure federal oversight for the most egregious actors, given that we are now having redistricting for the first time without having the full protections of the VRA, I think that we would have better and fairer lines drawn if states knew that there would be federal oversight of those lines and how those lines are drawn. It's sad to say that we need federal oversight, but I think that what we do need is a fairer system that would allow every American who's eligible the equal right to the ballot box. And that's exactly what this bill will do. And I look forward to carrying it not only in the House, but working with Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator Leahy, who are introducers of the bill, S4 on the Senate side, and getting it past the House next week and past the Senate as soon as practicable. We know that we're currently in a recess, but I thought it was really important that we drop this bill during the recess, during the pro forma session this morning, and really lay it out there that we hear the American people when they say that they want to make sure that their vote counts. I want to make sure, we all should want to make sure that every vote counts. At the end of the day, when we restrict access to the ballot box, we're restricting the ability of the people to elect their own officers, their own elected officials, and that's unfair and literally un-American. So I think it's my patriotic duty, as well as my duty as a representative of Alabama's Civil Rights District, representing Birmingham, Montgomery, Tuscaloosa, and Selma, that we work as hard as we can to pass H.R. 4. As many of you know, I've introduced a similar version of this bill in every Congress, that's 4 Congresses, since the Shelby versus Holder decision. Introduction today is in the 117th Congress. We have held countless hours of hearings, both on the House Judiciary, the Senate Judiciary, and the House Admin Subcommittee on Elections. We've built a robust record showing that we still, in 2021, have voter discrimination at the ballot box. And given that history, we stand firmly on the side of federal oversight needed in those jurisdictions that have had the most egregious violations of voter discrimination. We're not looking to punish or penalize anyone. This is about restoring equal access to the ballot box. It's about ensuring that Americans know that their vote counts and their vote will count at the ballot box.